Greetings once again, chess friends, Robbie here, and we'll continue our series in the English opening, wading through this book, The Dynamic English by Grandmaster Tony Costin. Of course we play c4, e5, the Dynamic English with g3, fianchettoing our king's bishop first. Black plays solidly in the centre, bishop to g2, black fianchettos his own bishop. Take a good grip on these light central squares, bishop to g7. We take an iron grip on the d5 square, d6, knight g to e2, which facilitates the advance of the f pawn should we so desire. And in other videos we have looked at knight g to e7, which was Botvinnik's own choice. We've looked at the aggressive h5, and in this video we're going to look at 6 f5, probably black's most natural source of counterplay. And the essence of this position lies in the tension between these two pawns, the e pawn and the f pawn. I'm going to look at this in isolation just for a moment, and we'll outline our strategies. Now, if we take this pawn and say black recaptures with a piece, we can see that he has lost control, or lost pawn control rather, of the e4 square. And in such a position we simply continue to expand on the queen side with b4, a4, b5. There might be a knight here, but our idea of course is to create weaknesses against this queenside structure. We have good scope with our bishop and good play against the queen side. So that's if black takes with a piece on f5. There is of course the possibility that black will retake with a pawn, the g-pawn, but again we can see that this has created some weaknesses that we can target. Of course we know that black wants to expand with f4, and when he takes on f5 with a pawn, we of course stop that dead in its tracks with the move f4 ourselves. And again we can have some piece play and try to target these weaknesses on the king side. So that's what we do if black retakes with the g-pawn. There is one other strategy that I should mention. In some instances black will play this knight to h6, and in this instance we play the move h4, and our idea of course is to play h5 and try to induce some weaknesses against this structure, and we'll look at a variation of that in this forthcoming video. So these are our main strategies, our main ideas based on the tension between the e pawn and the f pawn, which I would say is essentially the essence of this structure here. So just let me put the pieces back on and we'll look at concrete variations. Ta-da! And here we are, and we have just played knight g to e2. Black of course plays f5. Of course we defend this with our trusty queenside stonewall formation. Now black of course has various ways of deploying his king's knight. If he of course plays knight g to e7, well, that simply transposes to the variation that we looked at first, Botvinnik's own choice. Probably the most natural choice and the most active choice is to play knight to f6, but as we have seen, because of the inherent tension in this position, it is not without its disadvantages. But let's look at this move, knight to h6 first. It tries to get the best of both worlds. Tries to develop the knight, and of course it tries to protect, of course, the f5 square. In such an instance, as we have said, we play the move h4 with the idea to play h5 and induce some weaknesses in black's kingside structure. For example, if black castles, you can play bishop to g5. Queen, of course, is attacked and must move. Knight to f5. We saw this type of idea before in the h5 line, our last video, where the bishop and queen exert a strong influence in black's position. In this game, black tried to defend the weak h5 square, the weak g5 square with knight to f7, and here white plays the rather interesting bishop to f6. Black tries to defend against this with knight to d8. Bishop takes. In this instance, queen takes. And here white played the excellent queen to d2. Knight to f6 was played, and here we initiate our idea with h5. Knight c to d4 was played. We open the h file, h takes g6, h takes g6. Knight takes d4, knight takes d4, and here white played the rather excellent rook to h6. Of course, the idea is simply to take the g pawn and fork king and queen with knight to e7. Black rather tried to prevent this with the g5, but this is one of those instances in chess where you try to prevent a move and your opponent simply plays it anyway. Of course, rook to g6 was played, queen takes, and white played knight to e7, forking king and queen. So this is our strategy against this idea of putting a knight on h6. We launch an attack up with our h-pawn, trying to induce weaknesses in black's kingside. So let us go back to the main idea of knight to f6. Here we castle, and black castled in this particular game. We play knight to d5, putting our knight on this active post d5. Black plays probably the most natural choice, bishop to e6. And here we take the opportunity to pin this knight with bishop to g5. Black, of course, unpins the queen. We play queen to d2. And here black plays an excellent choice. Knight to h5, not only unpinning his knight, but of course threatening to play f4 himself. Now what do we do when black threatens to play f4? Well, of course, if he cannot retake on f5 with a knight, we simply chop the f-pawn. And now black has two possibilities. He can take with either the bishop, he can take with the pawn, or he can take with the rook. In this instance, he took with the bishop. Bishop takes f5. Now, of course, naturally we'd love to play, of course, h3 and g4, but because of this battery of queen and bishop, this is simply impossible, and we therefore must find some other plan. And in this game, White expanded on the queen side with b4. And the idea is to create some weaknesses against this structure here. King h8 was played, b5 was played, knight to d8, e4. And in this game, c6 was played. B takes c6, b takes c6, knight to c3. The active knight to e6 was played, bishop to e3, knight to f6, and here black played knight to c6. Oh, sorry. Just after that, f3 was played, of course, threatening to trap this bishop on f5. And therefore, black played knight to c5, giving this bishop some breathing space. And in the game Ribley Van Mill, which was played in 1997, White chopped this knight on c5. T takes c5, rook a to d1, rook a to d8 was played, and queen e3. And because of these weaknesses, Grandmaster Costin writes that White has some promising prospects. So that's our strategy for playing if black recaptures on f5 with a piece, in this case a bishop. What about if he recaptures on f5 with the g-pawn? Well, let's look at that. And g takes f5. We can see that there are some inherent weaknesses here. We can see that black wants to play f4. We therefore stop this dead in its tracks by playing f4 ourselves. King to h8, rook a to e1, rook 8 to e8, b4, knight to d8, knight to e3, knight to f7, and bishop to h4. And Grandmaster Costin writes that White has to be preferred in this particular position. Perhaps because of these weaknesses here, which White can target. So that is our plan, of course, when black takes on f5 with pawn, as he did in this instance here. So that really concludes our little video on 6 f5 in the Botvinnik system of the English opening. We can see that the tension created here by the e pawn and the f pawn really is the essence of the position. And if we can get our strategies right and our timing right, then we should have a good game as white. So I thank you very, very much for taking the time once again to look at this position here, and we'll continue next time. Instead of looking at the immediate f5, we'll look at 6 bishop to e6. So I wish you well with your chess. Take care. Regards to you, Robbie.